So I've got a question for you guys. What happens when you take an amazing artist and you give him 1 penny cent to make a show? Well, you get RWBY in that case. Hey everybody, I hope you guys are doing great. Obviously by the decorations behind me, Christmas just happened. So I wanted to start the new year off by shitting on a show. Some of the best ideas I've ever written. No, so I've been really wanting to talk about the show for a while, and if you couldn't tell, we're talking about RWBY today. If you don't know what RWBY is, to put it in like the lamest of terms possible, the YouTube channel Rooster Teeth, one day they were like, what if we made an anime show? It sounds like a genius idea to me. Yeah, so it was basically Rooster Teeth's basically just pioneering show for animation on YouTube of basically getting Monty Ohm, who at that time was one of the most talented 3D animators out there, and basically just said, hey, here's some money, go make a show. Wasn't that much money, but at least you got to make a show. But what I'm here to talk about, and I'm not going to give a history lesson, is the state of RWBY now. Now, if you aren't caught up with RWBY and you aren't following everything RWBY related, this video is going to be absolutely useless to you in your life. This is more of just a window look into my perspective of everything right now. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt. Also, everything that I say in this video is of my opinion. It is my personal thoughts. Just because I say something that you disagree with does not mean that either what I say or you say is facts. It is just simply what I think. So why don't we start off at the very beginning? RWBY Volume 1. Now, RWBY Volume 1 is pretty simple when it comes down to it. We're just trying to start the show, and all things considered, as a season 1, it's not that bad. It's more of just, oh my god, the animation does not hold up at all. You can tell they were working on a shoestring budget and a real tight schedule. I mean, that's what happens when you make your people in the background look like this shit. I mean, you just don't do that. But yeah, to put it lightly, season 1 feels like they're getting a good step forward, but also a bad step back, because, and really, you could tell a lot of the writing problems start here, and those, depending on who you are, either get worse or better by the most recent volume. The show is about 4 main girls: RWBY, Weiss, Blake, and Yang, and they make up RWBY, the name of the show. But the weird part about season 1 is some development for Weiss and some for Blake. A lot of the characters don't really get to shine as much as they should for a first volume. Especially this type of show where there are so many characters, especially in season 1. So really it should have been, we need each section in this season to focus on each one of our main girls and nobody else. Leave that for another time. Let's get our main characters out of the way so that the audience understands who they are and they can relate with them. So that's where one of the issues lies, is that the first half of the season is focusing on our girls and their trip going through school, but then it takes a hard right turn and starts to focus on not even another main character, but a secondary character, and he takes up 4 more episodes, and it's baffling, to put it lightly. Now, the creators have said how that was a miscall in their case, and I respect them for saying that, because I wish they'd say that more about a lot of other things. But overall, the first season isn't too offensive, and it's not the best thing in the world. Really, what everybody talks about is the fight scenes are where the animation just shines its absolute brightest, because that's what Monty that's what he was famous for, was 3D fights, and he clearly took advantage of the show, and he was like, I'm gonna do the fight scenes that I want to do, and they're gonna be kick-ass.
There's a line that will cross and there's no return. There's a time and a place, no bridges left to burn anymore.
But yeah, so moving on to Volume 2 of RWBY, this is whenever you could tell that they definitely had something good on their hands, and they upped their budget a little bit, and they condensed the season a little bit more, and they definitely honed in on a lot of the better elements. Not to say it's at all perfect yet, but really you could tell that, at least in the first half of Volume 2, they had really struck a good balance of what characters to focus on and how much fun they wanted to make the show like it is kids in school. The only problem, though, is I don't know if anybody talked to each other for the second half of the volume. Honestly, the second half of the volume is where it slightly begins to fall apart. It's not horrible, but definitely by the climax of the volume, you're sitting there and you're like, why do I care about anything that's going on? What is happening? And then nothing really comes of it. It's just they're able to beat up a bad guy, and then that's pretty much it. Like, a threat that happens in the city that they're living in just gets taken out in seconds, and it's like, are these the monsters we're supposed to fear? Okay. But I will say, other than maybe like some slight hiccups with the animation, overall Volume 2 I think is definitely an improvement, but it's still not at the point where RWBY could be or can be. Now, going into Volume 3, this is interesting. So, at the beginning of Volume 3's production, that's when Monty Ohm sadly passed away. So, this left the people who were working beside him to pick up the pieces and try to carry on and try to make the show what they envisioned he wanted it to be. And what I think is interesting, because for me personally, Volume 3 I think is the best out of all the volumes writing wise. I think the help of having the tournament happen in this volume helps hone in on what story they want to tell, because with that you have everybody involved in the tournament, so you can have some fights with these characters and you can have fights with these characters, and it doesn't really interrupt anything in the main plot, because that is what the tournament is a bunch of the students fighting other students. And so you can have a lot of character moments, and you can go outside of the tournament and be like, oh, this thing's happening on the sidelines, all of this stuff's happening, and it feels way more balanced than it should be, especially from what the show had shown before. And they definitely do show that they are still able to improve and really handle the animation of the fights on their own during this volume. Even though Monty had passed away, he still had lent some animation to the pre-production of Volume 3, but it still shows that they were able to pick up the pieces and make an actually quality animation. And speaking of that, this was the last volume before they switched over to a different engine for animation, and I think this season was the peak of where their animation was going for this engine. I think if they had stayed with this engine going forward, I think the seasons would have probably gone up in quality by a very minor amount. But I do think that this was definitely the peak at their point. But, of course, Volume 3 wasn't the end of RWBY. They kept going on, kept on moving forward. And to some, that might have been a bad idea. To others, they were keeping in the vision of Monty Ohm. For me, personally, I don't care either way, as long as you are doing it respectfully and you are carrying on something that's interesting. Because just doing the same thing over and over isn't too interesting.
It used to feel like a fairy tale. Now it seems we were just pretending.
Heading into Volume 4, immediately changed the animation engine, so the show looks completely different. They look completely different. They have a new animation style, so therefore the fights aren't going to be the same, even if you wanted them to be the same. They're using a completely different engine, and new animators are brought on, because the show is now bigger than it's ever been at this point. This is like the peak height for RWBY popularity, in my opinion, was that kind of weird in-between era of Volume 3 and 4. Like, it was, all eyes were on the show at this point. And what did we get? A mixed bag, that's what I call it. Yeah, so it's no secret that Volume 4 is hotly debated as, is it good? Or is it just boring? What is it? For me personally, there are good moments in Volume 4 that are bogged down by really slow, boring stuff, but yet ends really well, I think. I think overall, Volume 4 would go on my more positive ends of volumes, because yes, the idea to have completely different storylines in completely different areas of the world was probably not the best idea, especially with how much they had to balance it, because you would be focusing on one character and immediately halfway through the episode would be another character. I think they should have not jumped around nearly as much as they did, because I think that just completely destroyed the pacing of the volume. But it also does some really good things, like, as I said, near the end, it starts focusing on one of the more secondary characters. It starts leading up to an actually pretty interesting storyline and has a really, like, satisfying ending. And it's actually, like, not half bad. Now, I had mentioned before the fights. The fights in this volume are so hit or miss, I guess? Yeah, so it's weird because the first fight scene in the whole volume is complete trash garbage. It's not good. But yet, then you get another fight later on that's actually pretty decent. And then another one that's... it kind of just depends. Like, obviously, nobody on that animation team is going to be of the quality of Money Ohm. But if they actually had time and they had put a lot more of the talent that they knew they had onto specific scenes, I think we could have gotten something that was better than the product we got. But overall, Volume 4 it's definitely one of those in-between volumes where it's like there are parts of it that are good, parts of it that are bad, but overall product is nothing really notable. So,
Back to the fairy tale, back to the show, back to the wall, and there's nowhere to go.
Now Volume 5, on the other hand, now we're getting into trash territory. Yeah, it's pretty infamous that Volume 5, I think, was the breaking point for a lot of people. You either loved Volume 5, hated it, or after you were done watching Volume 5, you then hated it. Yeah, because I think this was at the point whenever I had finished Volume 5, and whenever it was done, I was like, that was a pretty good volume. And then maybe like a couple months later, I looked back on the volume, and I was like, that was shit. Yeah, so Volume 5 did a weird thing. It decided to lengthen the volume, and it decided to literally throw everything at you at once, but yet not do it in any clever ways, and obviously stretched out their animation budget and their talent. So, well, looks like we're not getting a lot of stuff this season. Yeah, it's pretty infamous that the final fight in Volume 5, the one that is at the very end that lasts for, I think, 4 episodes, is pretty infamous for being one of the worst animated fights that RWBY's ever done. And I really have to agree, like, there may be some individual fights that are worse later down, but God, this one's just boring, bad, and ugly. Like, this is whenever you start noticing the cracks in the armor. Like, some things just fall apart. Character motivations are starting to seem wobbly and not make sense. And there are some behind-the-scene things that are happening that start coming to the surface ever so slightly that start really kind of messing with the view of the show itself. And for me personally, I think it's Volume 5 onward is whenever I think it's just a stream of bad luck after bad luck for Rooster Teeth producing this show. Now, obviously, I don't work in animation. I don't work for a studio. Everything that I'm saying is literally stuff that I've heard and stuff that I've seen that people have talked about. So I am not obviously the level 100 IQ person to talk about stuff like this. So as I said earlier on, take everything I say with a grain of salt. If you are so fascinated and you want more information, you can go look up all this stuff up on your own. The internet is a treasure trove of information. So yeah, Volume 5 really put a sour spot in RWBY, and it ruined a lot of characters by their motivations and just how they acted. And some of them weren't even ruined. Their just writing was just dog shit at this point. So I don't know.
The darkness cannot last.
So, Volume 6, we finally get remnants of something that might be the best volume of RWBY so far. And then it takes a deep dive into the trash can. Yeah, so Volume 6 for me personally is the most, well, I liked the first half, and oh my god, I hated the second half. It's kind of like Volume 2, but 10 times worse. Like, just 10 times elevated to the max. Because you could tell that Volume 6, whenever it starts, is like, alright, we got some, like, decent animation quality. It seems like they've been taking the critiques of what's been going on, also to keep that in mind, taking the critiques of what hasn't worked, and they've really amped up and tried to polish it out as much as they could. And their stories are getting more interesting, and the characters' actually motivations kind of make sense now. There's still some inconsistencies and still some annoying things, but I don't think they were that prevalent. And then, like, in the dead middle of Volume 6, you get, like, one of the best episodes RWBY has ever made, where it's basically a horror episode. It's just like a short film, and it's so good. It's so good. And then we immediately go from that to Shittown. Yeah, so the second half of Volume 6 is utter trash garbage. It is nonsensical. It is not interesting. Our main characters are now basically bad guys. The writers want to cram every single thing to make you feel every emotion that isn't even earned at this point. The bad guys have to be overly villainous, twirling mustache bad guys instead of more complex characters. Like, you don't even need a complex character. Just give me someone who has a motivation for being a bad guy, and that's it. That's it. Don't make them over the top, twirling mustache, gonna put you on the train tracks. But yeah, and it just ends in the most, like, dissatisfying way possible. Not even as dissatisfying as a fan, but as someone who knows these writers can do better than this. They literally proved it in this volume. So to see them go really well to just off a cliff is so monumentally disappointing. I could go for days about why I hate that second half of Volume 6, but I have 2 other volumes that I need to cover, so let's just move on.
Keep dreaming about a better world. You keep wishing for some clarity. Always hoping that a lightning bolt.
Yeah, so Volume 7 is perfectly fine. It's like middling at best. Like, Volume 7, I remember saying, had some of the best and worst pacing I think I've ever seen from the show. There would be scenes where it feels like it's going at lightning speed, and then some scenes that would just drag on forever. There were some interesting concepts that were brought up. There was an actual interesting, like, political game that was being brought up in the show, and it was actually, like, beginning to look interesting. And then those final episodes happen where you kind of see their old writing habits happen, and you're like, I hope this is just this last couple episodes. I hope that doesn't carry on. Spoilers, it carries on. But yeah, Volume 7 overall, you can tell that they're getting better, but it also feels like at the same time they're getting worse at a lot of other things. Like, it feels like they keep on trying to turn the train in another direction, but that other direction isn't good enough, so they have to kind of sacrifice other things for it. Like, it's weird, but it's like, overall, Volume 7 is just very middling, as I said. Like, it's nothing too special. There's an amazing fight scene in it near the end that is actually really, really good, and it's actually character driven, and it leads to a great scene, but then it gets ruined by other stuff. But I might as well just let's go on to Volume 8.
We said goodbye.
Yeah, so Volume 8 might be their worst overall volume they've ever made. I have said that Volume 1 it's their first season, so obviously it's not going to be their best. They made some mistakes, but it's not the worst thing ever to exist. Volume 2 has a really good start, and it kind of just has a very middling to almost bad ending. Volume 3, overall amazing. Volume 4, pretty in the middle. They had some rocky, bumpy writing qualities. Volume 5, trash. Volume 6, first half great, second half bad. Volume 7, middling. Volume 8, just a trash fire going on an escalator. Holy shit. Volume 8 has some of the worst writing characters I've ever seen. RWBY, at this point, is not even about RWBY as a group. It is about literally everything else. There is a character that tags along with them back in Volume 5 that is a better, well-written main character than our main characters at this point. Our main characters are basically villains because the villains that we have aren't interesting enough to be good villains at this point. Even though they set up for Volume 7 to have a vastly interesting, gray, moral, almost commander villain who has to make the hard decisions that nobody else wants to make, and whether or not they're good decisions or not doesn't really matter because he just wants to save people. Now, what if we have him shoot an innocent guy at the beginning of the volume? That's a bad guy. Yeah, so they completely threw the villain of Volume 8 just in the trash, which makes no sense because right on their back door, they got a whole plethora of other villains to choose from that are coming to that place that could be the main villains. But yet we have to ruin a character that we already nicely developed and was interesting. It's just... Yeah, so it's a real, escalator of just shit and more shit, and it just gets worse and worse. Like, it feels like it doesn't end. Also, did I mention, they also expanded this volume again. Because it's not like they didn't learn from Volume 5 that you shouldn't do that. And what's even worse is the behind the scenes at this point have caught up so much to the show that I can't separate the two anymore. I am someone who I can easily separate art from the artist. It's pretty easy for me, especially as a visual medium, as animation. You don't see any of the real life people. You just hear voices. Those are the characters. But holy shit, Rooster Teeth, treat your animators better. Oh my god. Like, it's no secret that the animation industry is, well, it's pretty obviously a dumpster fire. Obviously, it's not every studio. There's some studios that treat people better, but it is not at a point where every animator is treated equally and or gets the certain amount of pay that they should for honestly awful work condition. And I'm looking at you, Japan. You're not out of this one. Rooster Teeth said they were getting better. They kept saying, we're listening to your criticisms. We're gonna do better next time. We're gonna not do trailers or volume shorts because we want to make sure the animation is as good as it can be and give our animators enough time. So that was a big line. Yeah, so it's pretty obvious that whenever the pandemic hit, that was a huge blow to animation in general. So obviously the stuff that was already bad was just heightened to like 1500, and even giving the animation team enough time still didn't work, because guess what? One of the show creators talked about one day where he was like, hey, finishing uploading the video for the next episode. It's like, you mean the episode coming out next week? What happened to you giving your animators enough time to animate? Was that a bold-faced lie? It's weird how Rooster Teeth takes themselves on this high horse of, well, you don't know how animation works, so you obviously can't critique us on the work conditions and all that stuff. And it's like, well, you're right, but we can compare you to other studios. And a lot of the other studios, even though their work conditions are absolute shit, at least they know that they need to get ahead of the curb and have stuff finished way ahead of whenever it's released. Guess what, Rooster Teeth? Maybe you should actually do that. And maybe they are, because Volume 9 hasn't released, and it would have by this point, but they haven't. So maybe they've learned. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they're whipping their editors and animators still to this day. So yeah, I'm just very frustrated at Rooster Teeth as a company of this show, because RWBY's potential was so damn high that it felt like they tripped and fell whenever they were trying to reach for it. And they haven't been able to pick themselves up at this point. And they haven't proven to me or anybody else that they have. And guess what? RWBY community, you're also shit. I'm just calling out everybody in this one. Rooster Teeth, RWBY community, you're all garbage. There is a level of just awful, horrible people that come to the surface whenever there is a slight argument against the show RWBY that it might not be as good as people say. And apparently they take that as you killing their mother for some reason. There's a word I'd like to throw around, and I don't throw it around lightly. Toxic positivity. If you'd like to know more about this, there are plenty of videos about it, specifically aimed at the RWBY community, about toxic positivity and how it is literally destroying the community from the inside out. Usually, I'm not one to say that the community or a fan base as a whole is awful. Usually, I defend that by saying, well, it's just the loud minority, okay? But at this point, it is literally 50-50 at this point. You could point at anybody in the community and you could be like, that could be a really decent human being. Or it could be someone who is just so filled with anger that anybody who doesn't love the show like they do is lesser than them for some reason. And I personally don't understand it. Now, am I saying that I can fix these problems? Absolutely not. F*** all. I have, 30 subscribers, I think, at this point? F*** no, I can't do anything. I'm literally a coin tossed into a well. I can give a suggestion. If the RWBY community wants to fix itself and Rooster Teeth as a whole, there needs to be an actual person from Rooster Teeth who needs to address this, okay? Because so far, none of the actual big faces of Rooster Teeth have ever said anything about how awful the community is at this point. And frankly, I think that's a bad thing. Like, if I had made a show and it has a really big fan community, I would be so in tune to how they're behaving at all times. Whether or not I'd listen to what they'd say or not, but I would just keep a pulse on it to see how it's going, see what's going on sometimes. But if I then figured out that they were literally destroying each other over the stupidest shit ever, like literally the stupidest things ever, we're talking about fictional characters here, I would be like, knock it off, guys. Jesus, stop. It's a show, and if you don't like it, that's fine. If you love it, that's fine. Literally nobody cares. Hell, nobody should care about what I said in this video. That's why I said take everything that I said as my opinion and with a grain of salt, because nobody cares. But yes, I needed to get all of this off my chest because I have seen so much of this from the sidelines that it just got to a boiling point for me, and I needed to make this video about just how this has gone so far. And guess what? I'm still going to watch Volume 9 because guess what? I want to. And guess what? Barbara, just because I hate the show doesn't mean I'm going to stop watching. Holy shit, that was a horrible excuse thrown at the RWBY community. I'm going to keep watching because I still believe that someone behind the scenes can really make the show shine as it should be. And I'm still going to keep watching, and I'm still going to be loving or bitching about it, depending on how Volume 9 goes. And guess what? That's how it is right now. That's just how it is. Just because you love a show doesn't mean you can't find faults with it. I love so many shows and movies, but every single one of them, I can find something bad with them. The Iron Giant is one of my favorite movies of all time, and yet, as someone who just desperately loves that movie, even I can find faults with it. So, from me to you, I would not recommend RWBY because at this point, if you want your blood pressure to just be as high as it possibly can be, just don't bother with it. If you want to enjoy watching a train wreck in motion, give it a shot. Sorry, I got distracted. Yeah, so I'm calmed down now. I just want to get that all off my chest. Next time, I'm going to be talking about an actual amazing CGI animated show. I'm going to be talking about Arcane because I really want to gush about that show. So, I hope you guys enjoy your day. This is going to be a f***ing long video, I can already tell. So, bye-bye.